I'm Chuck Baggett, and this is Life to Life. There is an old line attributed to John D. Rockefeller. Someone asked him how much money is enough, and his answer was just a little bit more. The line has survived because it describes us so well. Enough has a way of moving. You think, if I could just get to this point, then I'd be satisfied. A little more money, a little more security, one thing finally working the way I hoped it would, then I could really rest. But then you get there, and somehow there's another point. There's another thing to be resolved, to be repaired. There's always something else, another thing you need to do or that you're afraid to lose. And we keep asking our circumstances to tell us whether we have enough. Paul had stopped asking that question. He says, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. That's a remarkable thing for anyone to say, but it's made even more remarkable by Paul's circumstances when he says it. He's writing as a prisoner. His freedom's been taken away from him. His future's uncertain. He has known hunger and poverty. He's known seasons of abundance. And somehow, through all those changing circumstances, Paul says, I've learned to be content. So the question is not whether Paul's circumstances mattered, because they did. The question is, why did they stop having the power to decide whether he had enough? Notice how Paul said this. I have learned to be content. He doesn't say that contentment came naturally to him. He got it from his mom. She taught me how to be content, or it's just the way I was raised, or it's my personality. He doesn't say any of those kinds of things. He says, I learned it. And then he tells us where. Verse 12, I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. That was his classroom. Humble means prosperity, being full, going hungry, having abundance, suffering need. Paul learned contentment by living through circumstances that kept changing. And that matters because contentment is not usually learned in theory. You can believe that God is sovereign and that Christ is sufficient, God is good, but then something changes. Not about God, but something you counted on disappears. Something you desperately wanted to happen does not happen. Something you thought was solid and secure crumbles beneath you. And that's when you often discover where your peace actually is, where it was resting. We tend to think that the problem in those moments is the circumstance. This fell apart, therefore, that's why things are as they are. That's why I feel the way I feel. That's why I'm not content. I've got to fix this. But sometimes the circumstance is also revealing something. It's showing us what we had quietly decided we needed in order to be okay, what we needed in order to be happy. If this works out, then I can rest. If I can hang on to this, everything will be all right. If God would just give me this one more thing, I could be content. But Paul had to learn something different. Paul did not only have to learn contentment in need, he had to learn that, but he also said that he had learned contentment in prosperity. That may be a part that we easily miss. We usually think contentment is a lesson for people who don't have enough. I need this, I need to be content, and that's true. We face that. But Paul says it's also a lesson for people who have plenty, because both conditions test us. Need tempts you to believe that you cannot be okay unless God gives you more. But abundance tempts you to believe you must be okay because God gave you more. Need can make you say, If only I had this, then I would be secure. And abundance makes you say, I have this. I am secure. Different circumstances, but the same basic temptation. Hoping in something other than God. Looking for security in some place other than God. It's a temptation to let the circumstance tell you whether you have enough. Paul had to learn not to do that. He had to learn that poverty could not take Christ from him, and prosperity could not add anything essential to Christ. That is contentment. Not pretending that loss doesn't hurt or pretending you don't care. Not becoming emotionally detached from life. Paul cared deeply. Paul loved people. He grieved. He suffered. Contentment did not make him numb, but it gave him somewhere deeper to stand. Then Paul gives us one of the most familiar verses in the Bible. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That verse is so often used as though Paul were saying, with Christ's help, I can accomplish anything I set my mind to. But look at the all things he has just named in the previous verse. Having little, having much, being full, being hungry, abundance, need. These are the all things that Paul is talking about. I can do all things. I can have contentment in all these different ways through him who strengthens me. And that's the secret. There's an old ideal of self-sufficiency in Paul's world, Stoicism. The idea was that you should become so inwardly independent that circumstances could not disturb you any longer. In other words, I'm enough. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul doesn't say, I'm enough. Paul says, Christ is enough. So his contentment is not self-sufficiency. It's Christ's sufficiency. And that's why his circumstances can change without deciding whether his life is secure or not. His peace isn't resting in the circumstances. It's not resting in whether the table's full or empty, or even on what the verdict will be that he's waiting for. His life is resting on Christ. And Christ does not change when the circumstances do. Now that raises an uncomfortable question. What are you asking your circumstances to give you? What have you quietly made a condition of peace? Maybe it's financial. If I could just get to this income level, if I could just pay off this bill, then things would be good, and man, we'd have some breathing room, and I could rest. Maybe it's relational. If this relationship would just change, if this person in this relationship would just get their act together, then there'd be peace in this relationship, and I'd be all right. This conflict would finally end, and we'd have peace. Physical. If I could just get back to this level of health. It could be about a lot of things. Family, work, future. None of those things are necessarily wrong to want or to see improvement in, changes in. Paul had some circumstances he wanted to change also. He prayed, he grieved, he received help gladly. So contentment does not mean that you stop wanting good things, but it does mean you stop asking those good things to carry the weight that only Christ can carry. Because eventually circumstances will change. The thing you gain can be lost. The security you build can be shaken. The season you love comes to an end. And if your peace depends on those circumstances staying the same, staying where they are, where you need them to stay, then your peace will always be a fragile peace. Paul learned a deeper contentment, not because nothing mattered, but because nothing mattered more than Christ. And I think that's the right place to end this series. 7 episodes ago, we began with Paul saying, for to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. I hope you understand those words a little bit better now. If to live is Christ, then abundance cannot give Paul his life, and need cannot take his life away. He can have much or little. He can be free or be in chains. Circumstances change. Christ does not. Christ was not only one good thing in Paul's life. Christ was Paul's life. Is it your life? When Christ is your life, you can finally stop asking your circumstances, is this enough? Because in Him, you already possess the one thing you cannot afford to lose, and the one thing that you never will.